Robb Stark stood alone in the godswood of River Run, the red leaves of the weirwood trees whispering in a wind that carried no peace. The war had taken more from him than he could name: his father's honor, his sister's laughter, the safety of Winterfell. Now even the sword that bore the soul of his house had been stolen, melted, desecrated. Ice, once held by Eddard Stark, now slept in Lannister hands, broken and reshaped into blades for lions. But Robb was done grieving. He knelt beneath the heart tree, soaked in moonlight and silent rage. In his hand, a shard of the original ice, smuggled from King's Landing by a nameless loyalist who died before reaching the gate. A broken fragment, barely the size of a dagger, but it pulsed cold in his grip like a living thing. He'd tried everything to forget, to move forward, to be a king. But with every dead soldier, every lost banner, every raven that brought more horror from the north, one truth echoed louder in his mind: the South would never let a Stark rule. So let the South burn. He rose, the fragment in his hand biting into his palm. Blood dripped, feeding the weirwood roots. As it touched the black soil, the tree shuddered. Robb didn't flinch. The old gods had watched his house bleed. Now they would watch him strike. Within 3 days, he summoned blacksmiths from across the north, from White Harbor to the Shadow Tower, all loyal, all silent, all warned. What they were about to forge was not just steel, it was memory, vengeance, and perhaps something worse. The reforging of ice was not easy. The shard was dead metal, ancient and stubborn. Even Valyrian steel didn't melt for common fire. They burned weirwood. They added dragonbone. Some whispered of the blood of a direwolf taken in sacrifice beneath the full moon. Robb had not spoken since the work began. He stayed by the forge day and night, eyes hollow, watching the blade take shape. One blacksmith swore he heard the steel whisper names as it cooled: Catelyn, Ned, Theon, Arya, Robb, like a prayer or a warning. Another dropped dead at his anvil, his hands burned black, his lips frozen in a scream that no one heard. The others dared not run. When the sword was finally finished, it did not gleam like Valyrian steel was supposed to. It looked almost alive, cold as ice, but dark as a starless sky. Robb held it, and the moment his fingers touched the hilt, the wind in River Run stopped. The birds fled. The wolves howled, not in fear but in mourning. Robb named the blade Winter's Grief. That night, he led a midnight raid into the Riverlands, just him and 20 of his most trusted men. A Lannister garrison camped by the Trident never saw the shadows creeping from the woods. Robb didn't fight like a man anymore. Winter's grief drank, and the more blood it tasted, the faster Robb moved. The colder his voice became, the less. His men recognized the boy who had once smiled in Winterfell's halls. Some said he fought like a ghost. Some said the blade moved on its own. One Lannister knight begged for mercy. Robb stared at him a long while, then whispered, "Tell Tywin, I've brought the cold." Then he cut out the man's tongue. By dawn the river ran red. The camp was ashes, and Robb Stark stood on the bank, the wind biting through his cloak, the blade in his hand humming faintly, like it had tasted something. It liked. Behind him, grey wind snarled at nothing, but Robb already knew. The sword was never just his. It was awake now, and it was hungry. The cold never left Robb after that night. It followed him back to River Run like a curse, settling into the stones, the hallways, even the air his bannermen breathed. Servants whispered of icy footsteps in corridors long after Robb had gone to sleep. Fires burned hotter, but the chill clung to the walls. Some swore that they saw frost gathering on the steel of Winter's Grief, even in the warmth of the forge house. Others claimed to hear the sword whispering in the dark, soft voices speaking names no living man should remember. Robb didn't care. He barely spoke. His uncle Edmure tried to reason with him. "Your Grace, the River Lords are uneasy. They say the war is already lost, that we should treat with the Iron Throne." Robb's voice was flat. "Would you treat with the men who butchered your kin at the Red Fork, who took my father's head and mounted it like a trophy, who melt the soul of House Stark into trinkets for southern lords. Edmure hesitated. I say we live, Robb. The North needs a future. You've won 100 skirmishes and taken 10 castles, but we lose men every day. The Frys, Robb turned sharply. Winter's grief, strapped to his back, hummed again like a beast disturbed. The Freys will be dealt with, Robb said, quietly. Soon. He walked away before Edmure could speak again. What Robb did not say was that he hadn't slept since the forging. Not truly. His dreams were feverish, filled with snowstorms, wolves with red eyes, and shadows wearing his father's face. The sword spoke to him in the hours before dawn. It never shouted, it never begged. It simply whispered truths he had always known, but never accepted. Mercy is weakness. Wolves do not beg, wolves bite. He kept the blade wrapped most of the day, but even covered. Its presence seemed to leak into the world around it. Grey Wind, his direwolf, growled at the sword every time it was near. One night, the great beast refused to sleep in the same chamber, whimpering like a pup and retreating to the far end of the castle. Robb, though, had never felt more awake, more focused. The next phase of his campaign began with no council meeting. He simply gave the order, march west. When the Northmen hesitated, he looked each one in the eye and said only, "This is not for honor, this is for blood." Within days, villages burned. Lannister scouts were strung up along the roads, with their tongues cut out and their armor frozen to their flesh. They found a Frey envoy nailed to a tree near Seagard, his skin peeled back in the shape of the direwolf sigil. No one claimed credit, but Robb's silence said enough. The war was no longer about strategy. It had become something deeper, primal. He wasn't reclaiming a throne anymore. He was making the South remember what fear tasted like. Even the godswood began to change. One night, Catelyn came to him, her face thin, her eyes sunken from grief. She looked at her son as if he were already gone. "This is not you, Robb," she said, touching the hilt of Winter's grief as it sat beside his throne. Robb didn't look at her. "This is what they made me." She closed her eyes. "I lost my husband to justice. I won't lose my son to vengeance." Robb's hands curled around the arm of the chair. "You lost a husband. I lost a kingdom. And I found a sword. It speaks, Mother. It remembers. It sees through lies. It showed me the truth." Catelyn stared at him, horror creeping into her voice. "You're not listening to a sword, Robb." But Robb looked up then, and for the first time, his mother faltered. His eyes, they didn't look like his own. Not anymore. That night, the sword was left unsheathed beside his bed. By morning, 3 of his own bannermen were found dead, throats slit, no signs of forced entry. The Maester said it was assassins, but those closest to Robb knew better. The sword was choosing. They started calling him the Wolf King in whispers, not in songs or toasts, but in the hush of war camps and behind closed doors where firelight didn't quite reach. Not Robb Stark, not King in the North, just Wolf King, as if the boy they once followed had been replaced by something colder, older, and far more dangerous. It was the eyes, that frozen calm before a storm of violence. It was the silence, the way he could stand for hours beside that sword, Winter's grief, as though listening to secrets that made men go mad. And it was the things that followed. Him now, ravens with no eyes, trees that bled sap that looked too red, snow falling in the dead of summer, but none of that stopped his campaign. If anything, it made him more feared. Robb marched west and set his sights on the twins. Walder Frey had broken all vows, slaughtered men at a feast, betrayed northern blood at his own table. No matter what House Frey claimed, everyone knew. It was cowardice dressed as strategy. A dagger hidden in a kiss. Robb would not forget. The scouts came back with troubling news. Frey forces had doubled. Reinforcements from the Lannisters had arrived. The twins were heavily fortified, and their rivers protected them on both sides. "It's a trap," Great Yanumba grunted, slamming his fist against the map. "We should wait, starve them out." Robb said nothing. He simply turned to Winter's grief, which lay across the war table like a final judgment. His men waited. When he finally spoke, his voice was low. No siege, no waiting. He looked at Grey Wind, who growled low and savage. "We go through them." The assault began at midnight. No horns, no banners, just silence and cold and shadows under moonlight. The Freys were not ready. They expected honor. Honor had died with Ned Stark. Robb led the charge himself. He moved like death through the ranks, Winter's grief cleaving through armor like it was cloth, painting the bridge red. His cloak caught fire at one point, and he didn't even notice. Flames licked his shoulders as he cut down a dozen Freys, like he was carving meat. And the sword laughed. At least that's what the survivors claimed later, that the blade sang a sound that wasn't metal, something deeper, older. A mournful howl mixed with hunger. When the gates of the twins fell, Robb's soldiers expected surrender. But Robb wasn't here for terms. He was here for vengeance. He dragged the surviving Freys out into the great hall where Catelyn had died, where her screams once echoed off the stone and were swallowed by betrayal. Robb said nothing. He placed Winter's grief on the banquet table where bread and salt once lay. Then he pointed at the Freys, one by one, every name spoken by the blade, and each one executed. The last was Roslyn Frey, his would-be wife, still trembling in her wedding gown, her hands red with blood from helping wounded kin. She dropped to her knees. "I tried to stop it," she whispered. "I begged them not to. I'm not my father." Robb stepped forward, sword in hand. Everyone held their breath, but the sword was silent. And Robb, for the first time in weeks, blinked like a man waking from a nightmare. He turned, walked away, and said only, "Let her live with what she's seen." But as he left the twins, it wasn't victory that followed. It was cold. The rivers froze for 3 days after he crossed. The fish washed up dead. The trees around the keep withered as if winter had brushed them with death's fingertips. Even Grey Wind wouldn't come near the sword anymore. And that night, Robb dreamed, not of his father, not of his home. He dreamed of the crypts of Winterfell, and the dead calling his name. The dream did not leave him. Even days later, even awake, the echoes clung to Robb's bones like frostbite. He could still feel the chill of the Winterfell crypts, hear the low growl of the wind winding through the stone, carrying whispers that didn't belong to the living. He'd seen statues of long-dead kings, but their eyes had moved. They had watched him, judged him, called him by name, not as a son or a Stark, but as an heir of grief. He tried to shake it. He buried himself in war, burning out the last of the Freys and marching north again with fresh blood on his sword and whispers trailing behind. But nothing worked. The weight of the dream grew heavier. It wasn't just a warning. It was a summons. By the time Robb Stark reached Moat Cailin, his army had shrunk not from battle but from fear. His men had begun deserting, disappearing in the night. Some claimed they heard wolves speaking in their sleep. Others said the sword had begun humming louder, more frequently, especially near weirwoods. A few tried to destroy it in secret. They were found frozen to death beside the campfire, eyes shattered like glass. Robb said nothing of it. He had made peace with the sword's curse, because somewhere deep down he knew it wasn't a curse. It was a path, one chosen the moment he let winter's grief drink, and that path led home, Winterfell. When he finally stood before its broken gates, he hardly recognized it. The once proud towers now leaned in silence. Smoke still rose faintly from collapsed walls. Snow lay in patches across blackened stone. The Bolton banners had long since fled, but the ruin remained. He entered the courtyard alone. Grey Wind stayed at the edge of the forest, whining, refusing to cross the threshold. Robb understood. Inside, everything was too quiet. The hall echoed, with ghosts of old laughter, of Arya's footsteps, of Bran's climbing shouts, of Jon's silence, his mother's voice, his father's firm tone echoing off stone. And then, like something out of the dream, the crypt door stood open. He stepped into the dark without hesitation, carrying winter's grief in one hand, the torch in the other. As he descended, the cold grew sharper, almost alive. It clung to his skin, to his breath, to the beating of his heart. The silence deepened. The day he reached the bottom, the statues loomed before him, stark after stark, old kings with frozen eyes. Robb stood before his father's resting place, but the stone slab was cracked and the body gone. Robb stumbled back, torch shaking. His father's sword had been stolen, his father's name dragged through mud, his father's castle burned. But now, his father's rest had been taken too. Behind him something moved, a shadow in the dark, a whisper that wasn't air. Then, from behind the statue of Lyanna Stark, a voice, dry and low, called out, "The blade calls you deeper, boy." Robb spun, raising the sword. The torch blew out. He was alone with the dead. But he didn't run. Instead, he knelt. "I have carried your grief," he whispered into the void. "I have avenged your name. I have punished those who destroyed our house. What more do you want from me?" The shadows did not answer with words. Instead, one by one, the eyes of the statues began to glow with a pale blue fire. Robb's breath caught, the crypt filled with whispers, layered voices, some ancient, some recent, and one unmistakably his father's. "You are no longer my son." Robb's hand shook, but he didn't drop the blade. "I never had the choice. You died. With honor, I lived with rage." Then winter's grief pulsed and the spirits recoiled. The blue fire dimmed, the cold lessened, and Robb Stark stood tall again. "If the old kings call me bastard, so be it," he said. "I will be the Wolf King. Let the dead remember who we were. I will make the world remember what it means to fear the North." He turned and walked back up the steps, sword still humming in his grip. Behind him, the crypt doors closed, on their own, and above Winterfell, the wind howled, not as wind, but as a wolf's cry. By the time Robb Stark re-emerged from the crypts of Winterfell, the snow had started again, thick, relentless, unnatural. It blanketed the courtyard in minutes, silent as death, yet falling with the weight of war. The few men left, loyal enough to remain outside the walls, stared as he appeared, torchless, eyes glassy with something between frost and fire. They did not speak to him. They couldn't, because something had changed. Robb no longer looked like a man coming home. He looked like a storm in flesh. Grey Wind, who had once run to greet him at every return, whimpered from the edge of the tree line and vanished into the woods. He did not return. Robb said nothing. He stood in the center of Winterfell, unsheathed winter's grief, and drove it into the frozen earth. A pulse of energy shot out from the blade, like a shudder in the land itself. The snow around it melted into steam. The very stones of the courtyard trembled, and from beneath the broken flagstones the roots groaned. That night, his bannermen held a wary council. There were only 25 of them now, lords and warriors who had seen too much to retreat, but too proud to bend the knee to southern wolves. Lord Karstark spoke first. "The Boltons are regrouping in the Dreadfort. They've allied with what's left of Stannis Baratheon's men. If we strike now, we can finish them." "We don't need to finish anyone," said Mors Crowell, his voice low. "We need to bury them. They left Winterfell a ruin. Let us return the favor, salt the Dreadfort, kill every last one." Robb remained silent. He looked at none of them, only at the sword, now returned to its sheath across his back. When he finally spoke, his voice was colder than the wind. "There's no victory in this war, only memory." The men looked at each other, unsure. "What does that mean, Your Grace?" one asked. Robb stood. His presence was heavy. His eyes held the weight of tombstones. "It means we make the world remember what it costs to betray the North." He turned, cloak dragging behind him like a shadow. "Send no ravens, show no mercy. The North remembers, but the South will now learn what that means." He marched the next morning, a force of just 50, small, sharp, and fast. They didn't ride under banners anymore. They didn't chant songs or give speeches. They moved like ghosts across the snows, striking hard and vanishing faster. Frey patrols vanished. Bolton outposts were found emptied, their guards frozen. Solid in their armor, swords still sheathed, eyes wide in horror, no wounds, no blood, only ice in their lungs. The name Winter's Grief spread through the North like wildfire wrapped in frost. They said it was no longer a sword but a spirit. Some whispered it was cursed, others that it was blessed by the old gods themselves. Some even claimed that when Robb unsheathed it in battle, they saw shadowy direwolves racing through the snow. Beside him, snapping at throats that no man's blade could reach. But perhaps the most terrifying tale came from a survivor, a young Bolton squire who escaped a massacre at a watchtower near the last river. He told his commander, shaking and soaked in piss, "I saw him. I saw the Wolf King. He didn't speak, he just walked through our flames, blade drawn. The sword screamed. I heard it scream. It called my name, not shouted, just whispered, over and over, and the others, Sir Hallard, Lord Velen, they just dropped. They died screaming, but there wasn't a scratch on them. It was like their souls froze." The commander dismissed the boy as mad, but when the Dreadfort's fires went out the next week, no one laughed anymore. Robb Stark did not storm the gates. He walked through them. No one who stood before him survived to tell what happened inside. But when the snows cleared, the Dreadfort had no guards left, no banners, and no lords. Only the sigil of House Bolton torn down and replaced with the direwolf of House Stark, clawed in blood across the stone walls. And above the keep, Winter's Grief stood planted in the highest tower, howling with every wind that passed. But Robb was gone. No one saw him leave, no army returned, only silence. In the weeks that followed the fall of the Dreadfort, a strange stillness settled over the North. Not peace, not recovery, just stillness, the kind that comes before an avalanche. Villages whispered that winter had truly begun, not the kind measured by maesters and seasons, but something older, something no calendar dared name. Storms moved without pattern. Frost spread where it had no business being. Crows flew south, in swarms. Even the direwolves, rare and sacred, had gone silent in the woods, and no one had seen Robb Stark, not in the North, not in the Riverlands, not even in the dark corners where broken kings tend to hide. But Winter's Grief remained, planted in the highest tower of the Dreadfort, unmoved by time or snow. Men tried to retrieve it. Lords sent thieves in the night. None returned. One man, Sir Darren Hornwood, managed to reach it. They found him days later near Barrowton, walking barefoot through the snow, blind, frostbitten, and mumbling one word over and over, "Names, names." It said my name. The sword had become more than steel. It had become a marker, a warning, a curse. Meanwhile, in King's Landing, rumours crept faster than ravens. Queen Cersei laughed when her spies told her. The North has always loved its ghost stories. Let them sing songs to snow and shadows. We have the Iron Throne. But even her smirk trembled when Tyrion placed a parchment before her, a raven's report from Old Town. They say a shadow has returned to the north, he said, his voice colder than usual. A boy who was crowned and killed now walks alone, with a sword that speaks. She waved it off. Let him come. He'll find what all Starks find. In the south, death. Tyrion didn't answer, because the truth was, Robb Stark wasn't marching anymore. He was hunting. After the Dreadfort, he vanished into the Wolfswood, alone. No soldiers, no banners, no grey wind. He had buried his direwolf beneath the weirwood tree just west of Winterfell. No one knew what killed the beast. There were no wounds, only stillness. His fur turned grey overnight, his eyes clouded. Robb had dug the grave himself, dug it with winter's grief, and when the blood fell from his palms into the roots, the tree wept red sap for 3 nights. He had become something no longer wolf, no longer man, something the North had not seen since the Age of Heroes. The old gods whispered again, and they led him south, through the ruins of Moat Cailin, through the war-torn riverlands where trees still bore the scars of Lannister fire, through ravaged villages where children stared at him with empty eyes, and women lit candles the moment he passed, as though in prayer or fear. He said nothing. He took no food, no coin, only names. The sword pulsed with each one: Sir Meryn Trant, Qyburn, Polliver, Elin Payne, and higher still, above them all, Tywin Lannister, and below him, one final name that made the blade tremble every time it was whispered: Rose Bolton, because the truth had surfaced at last. Robb had not killed Rose at the Dreadfort. Rose had fled long before the gates opened, dragged his pale bastard son with him, and vanished into the wind. The final betrayal was not yet buried, and winter's grief hungered still. So Robb Stark walked south, into lands that thought the war had ended, into castles rebuilt too quickly, into the heart of a kingdom drunk on peace. He moved in shadow, he moved with snow behind him, and every night the south grew colder. The crops wilted early, the wolves came farther down from the hills. The stars above Westeros began to fade behind permanent clouds. The Maesters didn't know what to call it, but the Wildlings did. They had a name for the coming of a being who walked with vengeance, sword of ice and soul of fury. Norikar, the Winter King, and they said when he reached King's Landing, the Red Keep would turn white with frost, and every lion would kneel or freeze. King's Landing never expected snow, certainly not in late summer, and yet one morning without warning, flakes drifted from the sky like white ash, soft at first, innocent even, dusting the roofs of Flea Bottom and gathering in the alley, gutters like forgotten sins. Children danced in it, laughing, but the old ones, the ones who remembered war, fell quiet. By nightfall the laughing stopped, the snow grew heavy, the skies dimmed. The wind howled, not like wind, but like howling. Things with no form, no mercy. Cold crept into the bones of the Red Keep, fires burned without warmth. The bells froze in their towers, silent, unable to ring. And then came the ravens, dead in their cages, every last one. Maester Pycelle choked on his fear more than age that night. He shuffled into the Queen's chamber with frost clinging too, his beard trembling as he bowed. "Your Grace," he whispered, "we cannot send word. The birds are gone, and the sept reports shadows in the snow." Cersei turned from her window slowly. Her skin was pale, her hands wrapped in fur despite the roaring hearth. She already knew. She had felt it for days, gnawing at the back of her mind like a quiet, invisible claw. "Is it him?" she asked. I believe so. The Northerners. And call him the Wolf King, the Winter King, the Blade. They say it carries the names of the dead, and it is here for the rest." Cersei narrowed her eyes. "Then let it come," she said. "Let the ghosts of the North come to my gate. I have wildfire, I have gold cloaks, I have—" The torches lining the hall flickered, then died. Pycelle gasped. The gods! The gods are weeping, your grace. Cersei turned her gaze to the courtyard below. There he stood, alone, no army, no horses, no banner, just a man in a black cloak rimmed with frost, his face hidden beneath a northern hood, and a sword on his back that pulsed with a faint, cold blue glow, like the heart of winter itself. Robb Stark had come, but he did not storm the gate. He stood still and waited. The gold cloaks rushed to the walls, archers took aim, crossbows were loaded, orders shouted, but no one fired. They couldn't, because every man who looked upon him saw something different. Some saw the king in the north they once cheered for. Others saw a ghost with burning eyes. One captain swore he saw wolves, massive white and grey, circling him silently, their footprints leaving no mark in the snow. Inside the keep, the small council broke into chaos. Tommen cried in his chambers. Qyburn whispered of ancient magics he thought dead. This is no living thing. He's crossed death. The blade, it's not just cursed, it's bound. To names, to vengeance. Cersei only asked one question. Where is Jaime? They found him at the city gates, sword in hand, alone, face pale, jaw tight, but standing tall in the snow. Jaime had heard the stories. The Wolf King, the sword, the deaths, but none of it that mattered now. All he saw was a brother's final duty. Robb approached slowly, the wind swirling around him in unnatural spirals. Snowflakes turned to frost in the air, then shattered like glass before hitting the ground. As he neared, Jaime raised his blade. "You're too late," Jaime said. "The war is over. The North lives. Your family is gone." Robb said nothing. He stopped 10 paces away, unsheathed winter's grief, and the moment the blade left its sheath, Jaime staggered. A pressure crashed over him, like drowning, like falling into a freezing sea of memories. He heard whispers, saw Ned Stark's face, then Catelyn's, then his own, holding a knife in the dark, pushing a child from a tower. He dropped to his knees, gasping. Robb stared at him, voice hollow. "You think your debt is paid because you feel guilt, but the blade doesn't care about guilt." Jaime looked up, snow in his hair. "Then what does it want?" "Names." Robb raised the sword, and winter's grief screamed. It wasn't a sound, it was the silence breaking, a howl of every Stark ever buried, a cry of wolves and women and broken oaths. Jaime didn't scream, he just closed his eyes. And when the blade fell, there was no blood, only snow. Jaime Lannister vanished beneath it, body sinking into the earth like he had never been, and Robb walked through the gates of King's Landing without lifting the sword again. The doors opened on their own. The people did not flee, they knelt. And as he passed through the city, snow falling heavier with every step, one name whispered through the streets like a prayer no god dared answer. Stark. The snow never stopped. By the time Robb Stark reached the Red Keep, King's Landing was no longer a city of gold and fire. It had become a tomb of frost. Statues cracked under the weight of ice. Fountains froze mid-spray. The great bells in the Sept of Baelor were entombed in solid white, silent as sin. No resistance came. No armies, no guards. Even the gold cloaks, once proud enforcers of the realm, had abandoned their posts, some fleeing into the hills, others simply lying down in alleyways and letting the cold take them. The South had never known true winter, and now that it had come, it knelt. Cersei watched from the Iron Throne, her dress once laced with rubies and lions, now soaked in wine and sweat. The fire beside her burned high, but she still shivered. She held a goblet in one hand and a dagger in the other. Behind her, Qyburn whispered prayers to forgotten gods. "He'll be here soon," he said. "It's not just vengeance. It's the old gods reclaiming balance. You shattered the North. Now the North shatters back." Cersei ignored him. Her eyes were fixed on the throne room doors. They opened, not with force, but with silence. And there he stood, Robb Stark, the Wolf King, the Winter King, his cloak hung heavy with frost, his armor blackened with snow and blood and time. And on his back, winter's grief shimmered faintly, humming like a storm waiting to break. No fanfare, no army, just him. Cersei forced herself to stand. "So the little cub survived," she hissed, voice shaking but sharp. "Tell me, does the North train its sons in necromancy now, or did you just forget to die when we ordered it?" Robb said nothing. He stepped forward. Cersei raised her goblet with a smirk too tight to be real. "I should thank you, you know, for teaching me fear again. It had been so long." Robb stopped halfway up the hall. His eyes locked on hers, but they held no hatred, only emptiness. "You were never afraid," he said. "That was your weakness." "Then strike," she snapped, raising the dagger. "Be done with it. Kill your queen and freeze her palace. You've taken the kingdoms. Is that what the North wanted?" Robb reached for the sword, and for the first time, it did not answer. His hand trembled at the hilt. The hum was gone. The whispers silent. The blade, once alive with vengeance, now lay cold, truly cold, like steel that had lost its flame. Cersei noticed. She laughed, sharp and bitter. "What's wrong, boy? Your pretty sword too full from feeding on corpses?" Robb closed his eyes, and then he let go. The sword dropped to the stone floor with a ringing crack that echoed like a funeral bell. Everyone froze. Qyburn gasped. "What are you—" But Robb only looked at her. "I came to end something," he said, "but not you." He turned to the Iron Throne, the symbol of every betrayal, every war, every death that had carved his soul hollow. He walked to it, slow and calm. Cersei tensed. "Don't you dare sit there." But Robb didn't sit. He gripped the sides and ripped. Metal screamed as he pulled, tore, shattered. Valyrian steel blades cracked, iron twisted under ancient rust. And with one final wrench, he wrenched the throne itself from its dais and threw it down the steps like garbage. It crashed at Cersei's feet. She stared in shock. "You don't want the throne?" she whispered. Robb stepped back, his voice barely more than a breath. "The North was never meant to rule the South." He turned and walked toward the sword, but winter's grief was gone. Only snow remained where it had lain. Cersei sank to her knees, shaking. Qyburn fled, and Robb Stark walked out of the Red Keep for the last time. They say the snow stopped the next day. They say spring returned within a week. They say the Iron Throne was never rebuilt, and no king or queen sat its like again. They say Cersei lived, but she never spoke another word. As for Robb Stark, no one ever saw him again. Some claim he returned to the Wolfswood and became a spirit of the snow. Others believe he vanished into the crypts of Winterfell to join the whispers of the dead. And a few, the wildest few, say he still walks, sword in hand, eyes like frozen fire, hunting the last names the blade whispered before it fell silent. But there are no songs for him, no monuments, only a single line carved into the stone of Winterfell's gate. He who buried the South in snow